welcome to What the Trans!
What the Trans?
What the Trans indeed! Oh, how are you doing today, Ashley?
Good, yes. It's been, I've had the last few days off, so I've been quite relaxed and often drunk. It's been great. And how about you?
It's been pretty good. I was on holiday. As in, I didn't look up any news or anything real, and it was great.
Yes.
I spent the whole time just reading books about talking animals and sipping lots and lots of gin. It was nice.
That does sound nice, actually, yeah. Anyway, yes, so we can do the thing. We should get on with the podcast if you like.
Let's do the thing. Let's get on with the podcast. What's new and what's terrible?
What is terrible news this week? It's not all terrible. That is simply the name of the segment. But up first...
I mean, I wouldn't know either way, because I don't know what any of this new stuff is, because I haven't been looking at it. This is entirely on you, Ash. What is happening?
Goody gumdrops. Well, it's Trans Awareness Week, so you picked a good time to go on holiday. It's basically all been about you. Literally you. No, I'm kidding. So in the run-up to T-Door from, Trans Day of Remembrance, which is, of course, the 20th of November, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on, of course. But in the week running up to that, the 12th to the 19th, is Trans Awareness Week. Are you suitably aware of your trans? So quite a few campaigners and organisations have marked the occasion by calling for increased understanding, as we so often do. But this week it's in the news. So this also featured some information from a recent Stonewall study showing that around half of trans people have hidden their identity at work for fear of discrimination. Around a quarter of trans people are experiencing homelessness. And a shocking 1 in every 8 trans employees being physically attacked by a colleague or a customer while at work. So for us, this isn't so new, but taking a week specifically in the run-up to Trans Day of Remembrance to draw attention to these issues, is that a good thing, do you think?
I'm not sure if I'm the best one to talk about this, because I've been completely unaware of Trans Awareness Week. I've completely missed it.
Excellent. Good work. Well done.
So I have not contributed at all to the awareness of the trans community in the real world. I have done nothing. So I guess, yeah.
Right. So what you're essentially saying here that this entire week has been a complete failure because you weren't aware of it. That's a very selfish way of looking at it, I've got to say, Michelle.
Well, I think obviously it's a good thing, but I guess, the message that we're all, completely fucked and homeless and murdered and stuff isn't necessarily the one I would like out there in an ideal world, but these are real problems facing us all the time. So
yeah, it's a bit...
I think pointing people to it, at least until those problems have dissipated somewhat, I think it's kind of a moral imperative. But I, of course, say that as someone who did nothing. Well, I guess I'm talking on here. This is raising awareness to other people that may have missed it.
Yes, to the sort of 3 or 4 people who listen to the podcast. So, hi guys.
We have 150 listeners, Ashley.
Nice, cool. Hi guys, how are you all doing? Are you suitably aware of your trans? Because if you're not, just stick with us and we will raise your awareness. Because that's what we do. But yes, no, I think you are right. I think it is, because I was seeing actually things popping up about Trans Awareness Week in mainstream media outlets. And so the thing I saw first, I think was on ITV. So I went back looking for it and, so I found that one, and there have been various other media outlets who've put something out about it, and it's like, okay, that's good. It's not always been the best content, of course.
Well, trans stuff's in, isn't it? If there's anything remotely trans going on, it seems anyone will show up with a camera.
True, and interestingly, I did see that it was... so there was a screenshot, of course, from Mumsnet, and someone was saying, oh, well, it's apparently Trans Awareness Week, so, let's just all be aware of that. And then, the immediate comment was, yeah, well, when's the week and the day for women and girls? It's like, well, so International Women's Day is March the 8th. There's International Day of the Girl as well. I'm surprised you haven't heard about those things, actually. Or do you just spend so much of your time hating trans people that it blinds you to all the stuff that actually does happen? Anyway.
Well, they have to keep phrasing it as that we are taking something from them.
Yeah.
By just having, like, a week where basically, let's be honest, most people are just going to, share a bunch of links about information. That's what most of the stuff is going to be of Trans Awareness Week. But they want to frame that as us taking something from them, as if this week could have been, used for something quote-unquote useful. Like, that's all these people want. They just want to paint us as taking something away from them. So they're just going to keep doing it no matter what we do.
That's very true. That's very true. But the point is, as you said, these are real issues, and as difficult as it is to talk about this stuff, as I'm sure we'll find out later on, it's important that people are aware of it, people who are outside of the community. So this Trans Awareness Week, I think, is its heart's in the right place, I think, and it is a good opportunity for a lot of campaigners and activists to get their voices heard in a slightly more wider way.
But yeah, I did see when I was looking at the gender pop culture disorder stuff, like, Graf has got a new film out, which I'll be talking about when we get to that bit. He's been doing the rounds a bit on TV and stuff about all this stuff. So yeah, people have been... I'm sure the usual faces will have done the rounds.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm pretty sure they have. I don't know. I haven't been... I've got to be perfectly honest. I know you said you were on holiday, and I said I would do the news. I've actually spent most of this week playing Kerbal Space Program. So, and then afterwards I was like, oh shit, I need to find some news items, don't I? But
I mean, that's not I wouldn't say that's a waste of time, because, when the big trans spaceship happens, we're going to need pilots, we're going to need designers.
I mean, I'm not sure either of those things is particularly assisted by, I mean, I like to think it would be. Anyway, the point is, while I was aware of it and saw what was sort of going on, as you say, with Jake Graf and the articles and things that were being shared around, it was that was kind of like, oh, okay, that's good to see, but I'm just going to stay here and play with my game. All right, thanks. All right, good. You guys just get on with being awareness. You guys just get on with doing awareness without me. You got this one. I've just got rockets to play with. So
there is something to be said for, like, well, we kind of, as sort of our job with this, like, we have to be pretty aware.
Yeah.
So I don't feel too bad about taking a week off to not be aware. I think that was very important for my own sanity. And, it's fine.
Self-care. Self-care is important. They do say that. But moving on then. So nextly to Canada. Canada. And this is actually kind of a disappointing story in a way, because Canada's always sort of portrayed in stereotypes as being nice and friendly and accepting and sort of welcoming of LGBT people. But the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, which is the ruling party there, has passed a motion to debate whether or not the province will recognise gender identity, right? So although these guys are the ruling party, the Progressive Conservatives, which is surely a contradiction in terms, but anyway, so those guys are the ruling party, but this was at their party conference. And so nothing about this has yet become law, but it was a resolution brought at the party conference to have a debate about the validity of gender identity at the next one. So this resolution, which was brought, as I say, at the party conference, which claims gender identity theory is a highly controversial, unscientific liberal ideology. So using once again the tired canard of parents are very concerned about what their children are being taught, the Ontario PC party have agreed to hold a debate at next year's conference to debate on whether to recognise transgender people's existence, with a particular eye on whether such things should be taught in or acknowledged in schools. So, as I say, it's not a binding policy as of yet, but since the party at the conference overwhelmingly voted for this to take place, that's not necessarily a good indicator of the overall outcome. So no doubt a robust exchange of views can be expected, or an absolute car crash. Anything's possible, sadly. So, yes, this is a bit disappointing, and particularly the sort of individuals in the Progressive Conservative Party who are kind of driving this and have spoken in support of this, who in their sort of previous track records have been like, wow, you are actually just full-on anti-LGBT, aren't you? And so those people do exist in Canada. Shocking, but there it is.
I swear, it's like these people, they need to have a target. Like, before it was the L, the G, and the B, and now it's the T, It's like, They
It's our
just
go.
slotted us in there now. It's so weird.
But then, at the same time, it isn't. And so, as we've mentioned before, kind of part of the strategy of these people is to, drive a wedge where they can, like divide and conquer LGBT community. So use trans rights as a wedge issue and try and get groups of people purporting to be lesbian feminists, and all they're doing is shrieking about trans women in bathrooms. And it's like, but obviously people do go for it. So the woman who brought this resolution to have this gender identity debate has previously described the idea of equal marriage as making her sick, right? So this is not...
I shouldn't laugh, but that's awful.
I know. But I mean...
She's the worst.
I know, but weddings can make you sick, though, because they are all sort of sugary and saccharine, and obviously it's like, I can't remember if it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 that ends in divorce now, so it kind of seems like a waste of time and money for the most part. But some people are into them, so that's great. Yeah, it's just this... the fact that these people are, in charge of Ontario, this entire province of Canada, but...
Well, it's easy to forget that Canada has a booming far-right scene. Well, they've got the Rebel there, their far-right media outlet that's giving money to Stephen Yaxley and Katie Hopkins just for being bellends, really. Like, they're like... it's easy to think of Canada as, your mate from across the way that's got a lot of syrup, but, they're still people, and people will go far-right, and people will be bellends, and people will do stupid shit, so, yeah.
Yeah. Sadly. So, fun and games, as ever, with progressive conservatives, whatever the bloody hell that's supposed to mean. They just seem quite a lot like our conservatives, or indeed...
They want to make progress in being idiots? I don't know what that means.
They want to progress conservatively? I don't know. Anyway, the point is, these people are idiots and they shouldn't be in charge of anything ever. So, let's... Obviously, I'm not going to advocate for armed insurrection, except obviously I slightly am. But, vote them out or something. Just moving on to the corporate world now, which is always reliable as a source of things to get annoyed about. And so after a backlash on social media, the CEO of lingerie company Victoria's Secret has resigned after the chief marketing officer for the company made a series of dumbass remarks on Twitter. So, Ed Razek, the marketing git in question, sparked outrage when he said that trans and plus-sized women do not represent the fantasy that Victoria's Secret is trying to sell. Shouldn't you have transsexuals in the show? No, I don't think we should. Well, why not? Because the show is a fantasy. It's a 42-minute entertainment special. That's what it is. And he also claimed that no one had any interest in plus-size models and still don't. So, what an absolute arsehole. But it kind of gets worse, because having said this, he naturally tried to save face and apologise, but what he ended up coming out with was, my remark regarding the inclusion of transgender models in the Victoria's Secret fashion may have been seen as insensitive. And it's like, yes, it's because it was insensitive, Ed, outstandingly so, and he didn't make any reference whatsoever to the fact that he'd referred to plus-size models so derisively. So, yeah, what a shit, right? And so the head of the company has resigned because of what this guy's done. I haven't actually read what's happened to this marketing fellow, but I'm rather hoping he's like, the lingerie brand equivalent of taken out back and shot in the head, but we shall see.
So basically, they were going to put on a show, like a fashion show, and they weren't going to have any trans, and he was like, nah, no trans people and plus size people.
Basically.
When trans women grow, like, the body parts that they should have had from the start and whatever, that's a new customer base, right?
Yeah.
And, we're going to want to take that stuff on, the road, if you know what I mean. We're going to want to, maybe show it off, maybe feel good in ourselves, maybe buy some lingerie. That's not, like, there's not many of us, but there's money to be made.
Yes, and they've just kind of thrown that away. And so, a couple of trans models on Instagram and so on have said, well, look, you guys have just lost a customer. And other lingerie brands have come up and said, well, actually, we're way more inclusive than they are. So, just silly corporate mindset. And you're kind of astonished that such a person with that view of things would even be employed there in the first place. But then it's marketing, so You know,
they only have one thing in mind: making as much cash as possible. And you know what he's really thinking? He's really thinking that if he puts like plus size people or trans people or the subnormals or whatever in display, no one's going to want to buy whatever they're wearing because it doesn't look as good as it would on stereotypical cis model. And it's like, you're not selling this to straight guys, you know what I mean? This is not...
Yeah.
This isn't for straight guys. This is for,
everyone else.
Women and various women-shaped people, It's... Fuck, man.
I know, it's so annoying, isn't it? You just kind of want to...
Yeah, just, stop looking at it like a straight guy for 2 seconds, okay? Women want to see women that look like them. And there's only a tiny amount of women that, have the thigh gap. And, you could see their collarbone and stuff, Let's get models of all different sizes in this shit.
Let's be more realistic, right?
Yes!
Because the fact is, most people are not shaped like a lingerie model. That's why those people get employed to do those things. Because, so most people are going to be slightly different, and that variance tends not to be covered in any kind of advertising and modeling and stuff that I've seen particularly. It's the same type of person, able-bodied, usually white, buxom cis women sort of thing. And while that's fine for showing off the product, it's also like, well, representation is super important, isn't it? So...
Yeah, this is the same, stupid stuff that was, remember years ago when Sony got hacked?
Yes.
All their emails were taken and stuff. In a lot of those emails, there was, rationale as to why they don't cast more black people to be the leads in movies.
Oh, I see.
And there was one email from this guy just saying, oh, I love Denzel Washington. But if you put him in a movie, he'll never sell in China. And it's like, how the fuck do you know? Give it a shot! And then Black Panther came out and made, all the money in the world. So,
much money.
Just do it. Just try and, have some variance in who you hire, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's time. Anyway, but the point is, this guy's a dickhead. Mr. Marketing exec. What an astonishing outcome. But finally, for the news for this week, and it's not terrible, this is pretty good, actually. So, unfortunately for him, but hilariously for us, Dr. Ray Blanchard doesn't know when to shut up.
I love a story that starts with Dr. Ray Blanchard.
Absolutely. So Blanchard, who is mostly known in the trans community for concocting autogynephilia as a way of categorizing all trans people as deviant perverts, earlier this week endorsed the equally scientific and well-researched theory that watching anime turns people trans. No, seriously, he did. He shared an essay which was entitled Media-Induced Transgender Identification, which posits that trans women are actually lonely and repressed cis men who develop gender dysphoria because of slice-of-life anime. It's worth pointing out as well...
What?
This isn't yeah, exactly. This is an essay, a screed, published on Medium by somebody calling themselves Social Justice Wizard. And this isn't from, the New England Journal of Internal Medicine or whatever. It's, this hasn't been published in any accredited scientific journal. This is just some random nonsense on the internet. So the first paragraph of this essay, and I use that in the loosest possible term, anybody who spends a lot of time with the transgender debate will notice sooner or later that there are a ton of young trans-identifying males, which is their term for trans women, who are into anime, using anime girls for their social media avatars and sharing memes related to cute anime girls and so on. And it's like, oh, Jesus. So, a couple of things from this. Firstly, that this is just the latest in a long line of nonsense from Dr. Blanchard, but also, shit, they're onto us. We have to change our recruitment strategy. So, fellow trans folks, initiate kitten protocols. We are at Condition Pink. Project Orchid will now commence. Message ends.
Oh my god. Teen girls being into anime isn't exactly that out of the ordinary.
No, not really.
No, it really, this is just so absurd. Like, how does he explain all of the trans people that don't watch anime? Which I'd imagine is the vast majority, because I don't know anyone who does.
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's a meme. I've seen it online, right? And people sharing jokes about it, and trans cat girls and trans anime cat girls and the sort of whole confluence there. So I'm aware of it as a thing. But, that's not me or most of the people that I know. And also, if, like, by that logic, there would be, like, almost no cis guys left in Japan, right?
No.
So, like, it's just... But so he also came up this way. So Dr. Blanchard on Twitter is just unintentionally it makes me so angry, but it's also kind of hilarious because
didn't he tweet something about how being trans is like a form of psychopathy? Am I saying it right? Psychopathy. I don't know how to say it.
I'm not sure either, to be honest. But he frequently come out with stuff like that, to be perfectly honest. But no, I was talking about the thing from again, actually, just within the last couple of weeks, where he shared another sort of Medium essay saying, yes, that's a good point. And it was that, as the goth and emo community has gotten smaller, the trans community's gotten bigger. And he's like, oh yes, so all the it's those dastardly trans activists convincing all the goth that they're actually trans, and it's like, no, it's not that. Oh, you fucking idiot.
Well, I have been wondering, maybe 10 years ago, you'd always see a couple of goths in any town centre just, hanging around, smoking and stuff.
Yeah.
Where did they go?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of a grain of truth, but I think they've been coming at it from the wrong angle. Because I, myself, and several other trans people that I know, actually hung out in the goth and punk community essentially for camouflage, because they were the ones with the really good eyeliner techniques. And it's like, it was like everybody was gothed up and using hairspray and stuff. So it was like, well, okay, so I can get away with using makeup and stuff, and no one's gonna give me any shit for it. Well, obviously people did give me shit for it, but, nevertheless, the logic was sound, at least, but also I liked the music. So, it wasn't anime, it was rock and roll that made me trans, doctor.
Trans conversions of goths confirmed.
Yes. So yeah, I just wish he would get struck off or get run over by an ice cream van or just something stupid to bring an end to it.
I don't know, how much reach does this guy have? Whenever he says anything, it gets shown around the same old circles, but I haven't seen him break into the mainstream of any of this stuff in a long time. Is he just a joke now?
I mean, so he did pop up in that do you remember when the BBC broadcast that documentary, Transgender Kids Who Knows Best? I think it was early 2016, I think. Or possibly 2017, I don't remember. Anyway,
was he in that, or was that
he
Dr.
was,
Zucker guy?
So, well, they were both in it, right? Because they have worked together. So the focus of the documentary was on Zucker, but Blanchard popped up in it in his capacity as thorn in the side of the trans community.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so, so he was in that, and that was you don't see him quoted in mainstream media particularly frequently, but obviously he was in that, which was controversial and widely criticised, because it really was awful, and, I nearly broke the television sort of thing, nah! But so he's still around, but I think, I haven't seen anybody react to him with anything other than, oh, Jesus, you've completely lost the plot, for a long time. So, fingers crossed he'll get the message eventually. Or, just die quietly.
I don't know, he seems like a once-in-a-generation mind. We should keep listening to him.
No, I don't think
maybe
we should.
One day we'll get to the bottom of where all the goths went.
Maybe. So yes, that's it for the news, and yeah, there you go.
That's not been a bad couple of weeks then, by the sounds of it. It's been all right.
I mean, yeah, there's been lots of awareness, and I mean, so there has been some slightly harder to cope with stuff in the news as well, simply because of the time of year that it is.
Yeah, just the way it's timed, with after all of the nonsense from the Gender Recognition Act consultation. Now it's the the yearly part where we start our mourning and stuff. And yeah, it's...
Well, I mean, so I was actually... we'll come on to that later because we're doing a whole thing.
Yeah, let's do the gender pop culture disorder first, and then we can
Let's do that.
to town on T-Door.
T-Door, yes.
So, okay, gender pop culture disorder. Let's do this. Starting off, RuPaul is finally allowing a trans contestant to compete on his show, Drag Race All-Stars.
How fucking magnanimous.
But yeah, Gia Gunn from Season 6 is going to make the lineup of the new season, Season 4 of Drag Race All-Stars. Kind of like, as the name suggests, previous winners and contestants from other years come back and compete for the grand prize and stuff. If you've seen the show, you know what it's about. A bunch of drag queens like competing against each other to see who is the best one. Over recent years, RuPaul has been saying a lot of silly stuff about trans people and about how, they're not quite right for his show. Like he was saying that if a trans woman is to have the surgery, then they can no longer compete. And there's been a fair few contestants over the years who have subsequently come out as transgender afterwards, which is something that happens. Like, in a lot of places, trans women are attracted to the drag scene for the same reason.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it, that you were attracted to the goth scene, I guess.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I shouldn't be so disparaging, but God, just fucking RuPaul's Drag Race, I've just got a special level of contempt for it. And I know I shouldn't, but I mean, it's because of the things that he said about RuPaul, about trans people. And, obviously I know that several contestants have gone on to transition. That does not surprise me in the slightest. And I also know that some of them have been kind of critical of it and him over time. So, there's a whole mess of stuff going on here, but I don't particularly enjoy that format of show, the whole reality show and getting everybody stressed out and all that. I can't really hack those anyway. So I was never going to be a huge fan of this, just on the format points, really. But it just seems like the sort of thing that I would find very upsetting. So, like, stop arguing. Just be nice to each other.
There's always been like a complicated relationship between drag and trans people. This last week, Super Drags came out on Netflix. It was originates from a Brazilian animation online. I haven't watched any of it yet because, to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't really know what to expect from it. Like, I've had nothing but positive experiences at drag shows in London and in the UK in general, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to think of this one. But anyway, I'll talk more about Super Drags next time, I'm sure. The new series of RuPaul's All-Stars starts in December. It's going to be shown on VH1. So if that's your thing, check it out. I probably won't, because I don't know. I've done my time with the crappy reality TV thing. Like, I did my time with America's Next Top Model and, Project Runway. I've done my time. I'm kind of over it now, but... I don't know. It depends on how much the trans thing is going to be an issue, I think. But anyway, moving on.
Yes.
Filmmaker and actor Jake Graf, who you would have seen in Butterfly and The Danish Girl, and has directed a bunch of short films, has a new short film out. Listen. It's called Listen. I'm not just telling you to listen. The short.
Oh right, okay.
The short.
I was confused for a moment.
It's less than 5 minutes. It's a pretty blunt but effective piece on what it's like to be a trans teen. We are the voices of trans kids talking a little bit about their lives. It's a bit heartbreaking, as you might expect, but it's really well done. I think that it's going to be of particular benefit to people who have no idea about the trans kid debate and have not heard any voices from trans kids. So yeah, check it out on Vimeo. Just search for Jake Graf Listen and you'll find it. Or, send it on to some asshole who is like, transing kids is child abuse, and make them watch it a whole bunch, because they probably need to.
Yeah. Good plan.
And it's all starring like a bunch of trans kids, including a couple I've met at various points. I ran into Trans Pride, and I ran into that event in London I went to. Still here. We're still here.
Yes, I remember. You mentioned.
Yeah, the 12-year-old girl who did that speech that was set Twitter alight. She was in it. She was in it as a trans girl.
Well,
that was quite a nice surprise. But anyway, moving on. I've just found out that Girl, that Belgium trans girl ballerina movie.
Yeah. So we've spoken about that, haven't we? So
yeah, it's been called like trauma porn, trans trauma porn by some.
Yes.
It's got a cis It's got a cis boy, Victor Polster, playing the main part as a trans girl. I still haven't seen it yet. I can't find a way to get a hold of it in the UK, but basically every cis critic that I see is lapping it up. Bob Mondello for NPR was singing its praises, saying that it was on point, and I need to see this movie because it sounds like this is going to be this year's big old trans trauma porn moment.
Oh, good. Hooray.
You know, I think this is, by the sound of it, this is going to be the next Danish Girl.
Yes, so that's what the stuff that I've seen about it as well, was precisely my thinking. Oh, goody, another the Danish girl, but the Belgian girl this time, or more accurately, the Belgian cis boy. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be... It's Belgium's Oscars submission this year. It's going to be in the running for Best Foreign Film. And it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. When I watch it, I'll be able to let you know what I think. But I'm not going in there completely fresh, as it were. I have my own preconceptions of what this movie is going to be. But I will push them to one side. I will remain open-minded. I'm hoping that it doesn't sound exactly like it's going to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But anyway, moving on. Equity, the actors' union here in the UK, is linking up trans performers with theatre industry bosses in an attempt to address representation troubles and worries and concerns. According to The Stage, the UK industry magazine for theatre types, Equity is teaming up with All About Trans, the charity that you've worked with before, Ash. Is that right?
I have indeed, extensively. They are a good bunch.
Yeah, they're working together with Equity to put on an event called Interaction, which will take place at the end of the month, at the end of November sometime. It's a closed event, so, you know, if you haven't got an invitation already, you're probably not going, but it's happening. And it's basically going to put a bunch of trans actors and trans creative types in the room with some very powerful London theatre people. And hopefully, this will mean that there will be more trans projects, more trans actors getting roles, and more trans stuff in the British theatre scene, hopefully. Good. Also, there'll be conversations on the night and talks and stuff that will inform a new set of guidelines that Equity are working on in how to deal with trans issues in the creative arts. So yeah, hopefully more theatre trans stuff will be happening because of this. I'll be keeping an eye out because I do love a night at the theatre, and I've never seen a trans person in a play, ever. So that'll be nice.
So just to sort of jump in with my own gender pop culture disorder, I saw Burgers, Travis Alabanza's piece, sort of theatre at the Royal Exchange earlier this week.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. So it was.
I completely missed it when it was here. For people who don't know, it's all about how they, the performer and creator, had a burger thrown at them, and they just basically made a whole play out of it. Is that right?
Yes, obviously there's a little bit more to it than that. It's very cleverly done. Sort of good parallels are drawn, and it's sort of, I think especially for the cis people in the audience who sort of no doubt sort of heard about it and thought, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I hope they came away having learned something. And so I actually caught up with Travis very briefly after the performance. Because I work in the arts as well now, la-di-da, so I just get to do this stuff. And, that's precisely the conversation that was being had, was about that kind of representation and getting into the room with those people. So this, and particularly with it being run by All About Trans, who, as I mentioned, I've worked with, and it was one of their interactions with like BBC media higher-ups that got me in doing my BBC Radio Manchester thing.
Nice.
So that's how it let me get my foot in the door there. So this, like collaborating with big London theatre types, brilliant, awesome, lots of trans content, and it'll be, hopefully we'll see stuff that's creative and incisive and thoughtful and all the things that theatre claims to want to be. And it's like, well, excellent, trans people can give you that.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what, if anything comes from this. I'll keep my ear to the ground. Finally, Supergirl's still going. It's still silly. It's still over the top. Supergirl fights a dragon in the last episode. Nice. Neonala's great. She's sort of into a the trans character Neonala is sort of in a weird comedic sidekick role right now. Oh, I see. But a character has quote unquote narcolepsy, which means I'm sure that Dreamer will eventually come out and she'll start, kicking ass soon, I hope. It's been like 8 episodes and not seen any of that yet. Yes. Hurry up, I want to see a trans superhero immediately.
Kicking all the bottom.
Yes. And when she commences bottom kicking, I will let you all know. And that's it. That's all I got for the pop culturing.
Gendiferous pop culture disorder. Gendiferous.
Yes, that.
I'll remember that. I'll remember that one.
Use it in a sentence.
I've had a very gendiferous day. I did lots of gendering all over the place. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good word. Well done. You've made a good word.
Hooray! Victory. I guess we better get on with the next bit of the show then, shouldn't we? That's and you can tell we've been kind of circling around this one because it is late November, and for many in the trans community, it is a time of reflection, sadness, grief, all sorts of things. Because the 20th of November is Transgender Day of Remembrance, and that is the subject of our hot take for this bye-week, because there's a lot of things to say, to be perfectly honest. So, yeah, we're doing a T-Door bit. All right, you ready for this, Michelle?
This is the T-Door episode.
This is the T-Door episode.
We've known it's been coming for a very long time.
Yes. It's like, because when you start a podcast about trans stuff, it's like, well, sooner or later, we're going to have to do that. So we're going to have to do that episode, and here it is.
This is T-Door is the biggest one, right? We've got a couple of sort of awareness days here and there, but they do not feel as big and widespread as Transgender Day of Remembrance do.
I think that's to do with the amount of time that it's been running. So in brief, Trans Day of Remembrance was started about 20 years ago now. Slightly more, I think, by a woman in America who wanted to memorialize her friend who was trans and who had been murdered. And so the Trans Monitoring Project got started in the early 2000s. So now, every year in dozens, hundreds of cities all over the world, people gather and often read the list of names of people who've been lost to transphobic violence and hatred. So it's not a very nice time of year, particularly, I think. And so I went to Manchester's T-Door event at the weekend. So yesterday, in fact. And it was sort of what you'd expect. It's late November in the north of England. It's very cold. Everybody's wrapped up nice and warm, and there's a certain amount of camaraderie, which feels nice. But obviously the centerpiece of almost any given T-Door service is reading the list of names, which is obviously extensive and getting longer every year. And yeah, it was all very somber. It was very respectful. And so there was actually there was a speaker there who was from Brazil, and so she's come to the UK. She's a trans woman from Brazil, and she spoke at the event. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but she has seen some things, witnessed some things, and had to leave Brazil. And after finally reaching the UK, applied for refugee status and whatever. So she actually gave an address. English is not her first language, of course, and she spoke to us about some of the things that she'd witnessed, and that was quite difficult to listen to, as you might imagine. But this year, as with many, many years, the sheer number of people from Brazil alone, noticeably, is staggering.
Yeah, that's something we're probably going to get to in a bit.
Mm.
But what are your thoughts on the whole on the event? What does it mean to you?
Well, it's complicated because of course it is. So the majority of the violence is, in Brazil, Mexico, and the US, and so that sometimes the UK doesn't make the list at all, but it did this year after Naomi Hersey was murdered back in March in London. So, it does happen, in this country, and so it feels like you should, in activist purposes, in that sort of campaigner terms, it feels like you should be centering the most marginalized voices. And I don't think that is what's being done, but at the same time, I also appreciate the need and the desire and drive to memorialize and have it as an occasion where the community does sort of gather and grieve and mourn, and there are a lot of ways of doing those things. And so, you gather together and pay your respects, as it were, and then spend the rest of the evening supporting one another and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. It means a lot of different things to me, really, and it's a bit conflicting. I'm glad that it takes place as a memorial, but I'm really, I just wish we didn't have to. Like, I wish this wasn't necessary. Like, I wish that the murder rate for trans people was nowhere near as high as it is. That is what I would like. So, yeah. How about you? I mean, I don't think we've ever really spoken about this, you and I. Like, what are your thoughts about it all?
Oh, I'm all over the place about it. I've only ever been to one event for Trans Day of Remembrance. It was many years ago in London. It was in, like, a lecture hall at a university. I wouldn't be able to tell you which one now. And I remember being incredibly surprised at how many of the dead were coming from the South Americas. But also that, I don't know, it was incredibly sad.
Yeah.
To the point where, when I left, part of me was like, well, I never really want to do that again.
I see.
So I sort of haven't ever since. And I don't know what that means. Like, am I doing, I'm very conflicted by it. If you couldn't already tell from my...
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, yeah, that's okay, honestly. I am too, lots of people are, but...
it's important, but then there's also a big part of me that's just like, we gotta think of better excuses to meet up. You know?
Yeah, we're gonna have some...
Like, as a community. Like, it's like ages ago, like, a family member of mine was telling me how much that they had all this fun at, like, a wake that they'd been to recently, like seeing people they hadn't seen in years, and that it shouldn't have been a good night, but it was. And that's kind of how Trans Day of Remembrance seems to turn out. Because people do the sad thing, then they go off and get drunk, and, it's all solidarity and hugs and stuff. And then they go away, and they don't do that again. I think we need more things celebrating the trans community as well, but I think this is something that is very important, and that people need to engage with in whatever way is comfortable for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's good to talk about it, basically, and particularly when it comes to if you end up talking to the mainstream media, and it is, these things need to be highlighted at this time of year, because if not now, when? And, so we've got some stats, haven't we? Of course we have got some stats. So this is from Stonewall's LGBT in Britain Trans Report, in which 871 trans and non-binary people participated. And so 41% of trans people and 31% of non-binary people have experienced a hate crime or incident in the previous 12 months. And that number goes up to 53% of trans people who are aged 18 to 24. 28% of trans people have faced domestic abuse from a partner, but the vast majority of respondents, 79%, do not report hate crimes to the police. And so this was actually touched on at the memorial service yesterday, whereby we're encouraged to report the hate crimes when they occur, be it an act of physical violence or, threatening letters or verbal abuse or whatever. We're encouraged to report it, right? But when you report it, you speak to the police, or whoever through a third-party hate crime reporting center, and they're almost certainly not going to be able to catch anybody. That, they know that, particularly for something like verbal abuse, where it's like, well, this thing just happened, and it's like, you can give a description, but what's the likelihood that someone's going to actually be pulled in for that? So,
with that kind of thing, I think a lot of that is that a lot of people don't really understand what a hate crime is, because I didn't. Like, I used to, in the early days, everyone, I guess, gets a fair amount of verbal abuse when you're starting out, when you're just, in my case, having to do the 2 years of life experience before, they would even consider giving me hormones back in those dark times of 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was easy for people to see me as a freak and start shouting stuff, and I didn't think of that as a hate crime, not until, I think it might have been you who said, no, that's a hate crime.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
I mean, yeah, sorry, dude.
Yeah, I would never have thought to have called anyone to report it. And then even if I did, I can't see anything happening from that. Like, they're not going to go out and, like, they're not going to put out an all points bulletin.
Yes.
Chase them down to the top of a skyscraper in the rain and start shouting, Jimmy, it's over.
Trans
We've
women
got
are
you.
women.
Exactly. Like, that's not going to happen.
It's not how it works. I mean, so that what everybody says about it, like community organizations and the police themselves doing outreach and stuff, they say, report it for statistical purposes. We need to know how bad the problem is. And that is genuinely a valid statement to convince other people, other interests, parts of the government or the Home Office or whoever, to convince them that there is a problem. You need a statistical, you need an evidence base for it. Now, the evidence base that we do have with this kind of underreported level of hate crime is nevertheless tending to show that trans people do encounter higher rates of discrimination and abuse and physical abuse and things at a higher rate to the rest of the general population. That has been shown in study after study, unfortunately, but even then it's been said to be underreported. And in the last year alone, it's gone up 25% according to hate crime figures that came out. I mean, it showed that kind of raise across the board. Yeah,
when it came to race and sexual identity and stuff like that. But then I think the reasons for all of the rises are different and complex, and I'm pretty sure that the rise in anti-trans hate crimes and stuff has definitely gone up as the awareness has gone up.
Yeah, I agree. And so whenever there's a spike in hate crime, the question is always, so is this genuinely more incidents, or is this simply more people reporting the same number of incidents? And I think it's probably a bit of both, really. I do think there possibly has been a spike. There has definitely been people who've been feeling emboldened. Just anecdotally, I seem to, several of my trans friends and acquaintances, comrades, whatever, several of them have had something occur within the relatively recent, within the last few months, essentially. But that's just anecdotal, and maybe.
Yeah, I think anecdotal stuff will. I mean, everything anecdotal ends up being data, right? But at the same time, it can paint a distorted view of the world.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's best to rely on the data, but then the data doesn't exactly make easy reading. Like, want to talk about the Americas for this, because that is where...
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, we're going to have to.
Well over half of the deaths, and maybe up to 80% of the deaths are happening in the Americas, the North America, South America, and the countries in between. The Human Rights Campaign Foundation in America has released a report titled Epidemic: Fatal Anti-Transgender Violence in America in 2018. And this investigation has gone on for 6 years. They've got 6 years of numbers, and in the last 6 years, 115 trans women have been murdered, 7 trans men have been murdered, and 6 other people have been murdered of other identities. 69% of all known victims are black. 80 of the victims were killed with guns, because America.
Yeah.
And 41 of the victims were employed in sex work. North America is definitely suffering an epidemic of anti-trans violence right now. That is a thing that's been happening for a long time.
I mean, who would have expected that the president of one of the most, industrialized societies in the world, really, loudly and vociferously proclaiming that transgender people can't serve in the army and revoking protections? Who would have thought that would have had such an impact, where people feel so emboldened by that rhetoric, by that, you're not a real person, bang, bang, sort of thing.
Well, right now, that doesn't seem to necessarily have had that much of an effect so far. I mean, from the numbers in the study, they've sort of been bouncing around 20, 25 a year, every year. Last year, I mean, this year isn't over yet, but in 2017, there was a few more trans people murdered in the United States than there was in the last year. But the last year isn't over yet, so, maybe it'll catch up, yeah.
There's always time, sadly.
But yeah, I can see that definitely having a marked effect going forward, because after this last midterm election in America, trans people are being talked about a lot more than ever before. Awareness is at an all-time high in the United States, and as we've said before, with awareness comes a backlash.
Sadly.
But the race component, I don't think is getting talked about nearly enough this time around. I'm not really seeing it anywhere. Like, if we go, like, all the names that are read out, maybe 80% of them are from South America.
Yeah.
And not just, like, Mexico, Brazil, Guatemala, Argentina. Those are the countries where epidemic is the only word for it. It's incredibly widespread. And, like, when I first Remembrance service, when they started the Brazil section, I thought, oh, this will be like maybe 9 or 10 names and then move on. No, it was like
most of the list.
Maybe 3/4 of the entire evening was reading out Brazilian names and the names of trans women of colour.
Yeah.
And we put that down and at the service I went to and at other sort of events and other information has got out there. I don't see race being mentioned, really. Like, do you see it?
So, I mean, I think it has been acknowledged in Manchester. At various times, at different times in different places, it's been done well and not quite so well. But obviously, last night, there was a speaker from Guatemala, and so she was speaking of her personal experience and that of, several of her friends, and indeed the things that she witnessed, and, her friends literally being gunned down in front of her. And I think the racial component, while acknowledged, as you say, is not talked about enough, I feel. But also the other thing that isn't talked about enough, and we've touched on it already, is the fact that a lot of the people who are on the list are also sex workers. So, the kind of traditional stereotype narrative is the transgender sex worker who is doing that and is unable to, because they're unable to get anything else, right? That's the stereotype. But there's a grain of truth in that, because it kind of, the lack of acceptance and full-on discrimination forces people into the kind of underground black market economies. The risks are higher. But it's a way for trans women who don't have money and need some quickly can get it. It is an industry where trans women are in demand, which I don't think is necessarily ideal, but it's just the nature of things. But the problem is that by the nature of the way sex work is not perceived as real work and the way that it is criminalized in various parts of the world, by then kind of, the same people who are the ones that would, get a kick out of visiting a trans sex worker are the same people who in their professional life would probably happily legislate against their existence. And, so it's, time and again you hear sort of stories of sex workers of, people who are abusive towards them, who are nevertheless sort of upstanding family people, allegedly so, So the fact that there's a whole sort of group of people out there who kind of want to keep trans people sidelined and fetishized in this way, and are quite happy for us to be killed in doing so, just trying to survive. It's so objectifying, dehumanizing, and there's a lot of stuff surrounding this whole thing and the power structures that sustain it and perpetuate it, and the way we talk about that is flawed, because there's no way that you or I could have a full in-depth understanding of a lot of the stuff that people in the global south are going to be going through as a result of being trans. There's no way you and I could understand that coming from where we do. So how are we to pay our respects? Is it even appropriate for us to do so? I
know exactly what you mean. It's like, well, there was a recent video by Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, where she sort of set up. Will you have seen this one? You must have seen this one. Everyone seems to have seen ContraPoints by now. She's really...
I'm familiar with ContraPoints, yeah.
Like, she was doing that video where she was talking, well, it wasn't her, she was playing a character talking to the Catgirl one. Saying that, telling them, like, oh, you got to go to uni, like, the bodies being wheeled into the hospitals don't look like you, so don't use somebody else's struggle to, boost yourself up. in so many words. Like, she's a lot better at that kind of thing than me. That's why she's ContraPoints and I'm not. But yeah, basically, just what you were saying, that, like, using the deaths of trans women from a completely different world from us to sort of make a political point. Like, is that crass?
Something in me feels that it is, you know? Or at least the way that it is done for the most part. So one of my acquaintances was talking about the Tito memorial service that they went to, and it wasn't one in Manchester, but I'm not going to reveal the location. But basically, the centerpiece of it seemed to be like white guilt and white fragility, and it's like, no, that's not how you do it. So my acquaintance actually got up and left halfway through, along with several other people, because it was. The things that it was talking about were like, no, you're doing this wrong. You know, you're, so.
I think it's something that people need to talk about. And I don't think that either of us are saying that Trans Day of Remembrance should stop.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean,
but I think that there is, like, I don't think that it's taking into account the other factors that went into these people's deaths. Like, it's holding it up and saying trans people were murdered entirely for being trans. And that's not true. Like, there's a lot of people in the trans community that are more likely to get murdered than you or I.
Yeah.
Like, we're in the UK where the murder rates are relatively low compared to other countries anyway. We're both white. We both, like, I mean, we didn't suddenly come from riches, but we didn't come from abject poverty either. You know, we are so much less likely to be murdered than a lot of trans women in the South Americas. And we really should be talking about why that is. And if we're even complicit in it.
Yeah, because it's the confluence of privilege and, I guess, colonialism in that sense. I mean, you know, yeah, but it's so disturbing because the other thing as well that we know is that it's not going to get any better anytime soon with the people, you know, the powers that be, the recent president of the, you know, presidential election of Brazil. They have literally just elected a fascist. What impact's that going to have? Right? You know, I mean, I suspect there's going to be a lot of people in Brazil who are going to be suffering under the incoming president's regime, but I
would not be surprised if the second this guy gets in, the murder rate goes up.
Yeah.
For trans people. Like, Jair Bolsonaro was running on a whole law and order thing, as these people tend to do, saying that, like, you know, the whole of Brazil's going to collapse. And Brazil has problems with crime, but I don't see the trans murder rate going down.
No.
You know, I don't think that's going to be a priority for him, at the very least. And if anything, I think there will be a lot more. Well, the trans community is going to get pushed harder than ever before, and people probably are going to get hurt in that. So, yeah, it could go either way. The list could remain the same, or it could go up. I don't see it going down anytime soon.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's and it's really difficult to know that, to kind of know that that's the case and go, oh, well, you know, so while we're, like, you know, there were 369 people on the list this year, so that's basically one for every day of 2008, you know, from last Tito to this one. 369 people, so more or less one a day, plus a few extra. You know, so while we were, you know, you and I were at Trans Pride Brighton, openly being trans, surrounded by thousands of people like us, you know, we were there while terrible things were taking place in other parts of the world. You know, and it's like, God, it's, you know, it's hard to sort of know what to say about it, but obviously it does happen here too, as we saw in March with the murder of Naomi Hersey, whose murderer was recently banged up, which was kind of good news because it, for a long time, and indeed still in many parts of the world, the murderers are not vigorously or indeed even partially investigated by the authorities, who just don't care about murdered trans sex workers who are not white. They just don't. So
I think the trans community should be having a lot more conversations about how we can address this, because whilst looking at the trans thing is important, like, of course, being trans factored into these people's deaths.
Yes.
That is pretty much a certainty. But there are other things at play, and we need to go into that. We need to get into what those other things are and maybe look at ways to try and mitigate or just try and lessen the rate, because it's ridiculous at this point. Wow, Trans Day of Remembrance does bring up a lot of complex emotions, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? But then, so there are a lot of people, though, who are arguing for a much more intersectional approach to Trans Day of Remembrance, and we should listen to those people, right? Yeah, because it has to center those voices, and it has to not be an expression of white guilt and fragility and whatever else. It needs to be appropriately respectful of, but also, considerate of the other issues that get people there, that put people into situations where they are murdered. And, there's going to be a lot of things going on, but then that's why we need that intersectional approach. So yeah, I think that's probably as much as you and I can really say about this, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you're listening, go do some reading up on all the different factors that are killing us, because I think that is something we need to look at instead of just putting it down to trans identity alone, because it's never trans identity completely alone.
Well,
actually, yeah, that's probably going way too far.
It is, yeah. Because actually,
this is why I should not be involved with any kind of real policy things. I can barely manage a trans podcast.
You just need to think a little more intersectionally. I think, as you say, being trans is definitely a huge factor in this, but as it's not the only one. So yes, let's all have a think, but also, let's be kind. This time of year, let's be compassionate. Let's be nice to each other. And if you're choosing to observe T-Door in some way, great. If you're choosing to not, that is fine too. So, you don't have to. There's nothing mandatory about this.
I'll be spending my Trans Day of Remembrance, as I usually do, sat at home watching ridiculous movies and lighting a candle. I also like to read that one piece Paris Lees did, where she basically... Well, she did many years ago for The Guardian, all about Trans Day of Remembrance, where she makes a very good point that we should mourn the dead but fight like hell for the living. And I think that's something I'm going to be thinking about this reflectory period.
That's a good one. Mourn the dead, fight like hell for the living. Words to live by. So yeah, have a good time, everybody. We'll catch you in 2 weeks.
So yeah, thanks for listening. Check us out on Twitter @WhatTheTrans, and check us out on Facebook.com/WhatTheTrans. And check out our WordPress, whatthetrans.wordpress.com. And, send us all the internet things. Say hello, tell us all about yourselves, and tell us about how you spent your T-Door this year. Ashley, anything to promote?
Let's just be nice to each other, please. That's all I can think of asking for at the moment, It's all very tiring, so let's be nice to each other, please.
Yeah, that's a good thing to end on. Everyone, be awesome to each other and other Bill and Ted things.
Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.